Hey, thanks for joining me today for episode 37 of Podcasting Your Brand. I'm your host, producer Jemmy, providing learning lessons for you to podcast your brand. And today I'm going to share part 5 of this initial series of episodes, Thoughts Before Launching, The How, also known as Deciding on a Format. This episode is brought to you by my own brand, Flintstone Media. Listen in and let's do this. Off the top, this is going to be the trickiest episode yet, because I usually would have the answers to the questions and considerations we've been through together in parts 1 through 4 about your brand in particular and your podcasting goals. But of course I don't. So I'm going to be using a bunch of examples as we go through it with links to them in the show notes. All right, let's start with just talking about different formats. The 2 most common types of formats are ones I'm sure you're already familiar with: solo and guested. Now, when I say solo, what I specifically mean is host only. So that could be you on your own or with a co-host. And for the context of this episode, whenever you hear me say you, just assume I mean you or you and your co-host, if that is applicable in your situation. By the way, I will have an episode coming up real soon on the topic of co-hosts, so of course, stay tuned for that. All right, so a solo show is just you getting on the mic to discuss your topic. A guested show, on the other hand, is one where you obviously have a guest. But there are so many other options beyond those 2. You can create a panel-based show. That's a show where there's several people on the mic for one big conversation. But just know, it can be like herding cats. So you really have to have someone being the main ringleader. Then there's scripted fiction, which can be very fun to do, but also very involved and a bit challenging, because to do it right, you not only need a good script, but likely multiple voice actors and a Foley artist, someone who can add the sounds that make the scenery. Think old school radio, like when Orson Welles scared the crap out of everyone with his famous reading of War of the Worlds. Sorry, too soon. I shouldn't be laughing, but it's funny. If you're not familiar with that, it's a great story about, well, a great story and the power of audio, but I digress. Then there are also documentary style shows. Now, the more traditional style of this is what you hear from lots of programming put out by outlets like NPR. There's a main narrator, several interviews that have been pre-recorded with the pieces patched together throughout the episode or episodes to tell the story. In fact, one that NPR does that I find particularly amazing is Seen on Radio. And in the case of that show, each season is its own individual documentary. It's really, really good, and I'll include a link to it in the show notes for you. Another means of creating a documentary-style show that I've seen is when the host interviews a single guest over several episodes, telling their full story through the journey of those episodes. A good example of this is my friend Wilkine Brutus's mini-series podcast called A Boat, a Voyage, a Haitian Refugee Story. So, of course, link in the show notes. You're welcome. Then there are also news-type podcasts, and they're pretty much as they sound. And the tone of your delivery can be anywhere from the Today Show to NBC Nightly News and everything in between, depending on the kind of news you're sharing. My friend Mandy does a fantastic daily news show called The Newsworthy. So I'll link to that one for you in the show notes too. In case you haven't figured it out yet, I highly recommend that you expand your mind and listen to a couple of different show formats when deciding on what works for you. Now, here's the fun thing about podcasting. You can literally make up any format you want. And you can even mix and match different formats as segments to create a whole new type of show experience for your listeners. So while these next few format types that I'm going to share to keep your brainstorming juices a-flowing can definitely stand on their own as a well-crafted full episode. They work especially well as segments in an episode. So I wanted to list them a bit separately. All right, here we go. And whether for segments or as full episodes, it's more about what you do with that format that can make it really unique for your show. Okay, here we go. You can have a gamified or trivia segment. In fact, these have been some of the most fun types of segments for me to include in various shows over the years. But as an example of a show that does that well as an entire show, you can check out Trivial Warfare by my friend Jonathan Oakes, linked of course. But as a segment, you might ask the question, then do a sponsor mention, then give the answer on the other side, as an example of one way to do a trivia segment. Or you can set up the trivia question on one episode for people to send in responses, and you'll reveal the answer and winner in a follow-up episode, typically the very next one, but not always. If you're teasing the same trivia question over several episodes, then obviously it's not going to be revealed the very next episode. Another format that lends itself to a great segment is a list. So, for example, a show my team produces for Horse Radio Network is called Horses in the Morning. It's the network's flagship show. And they do this segment called Really Bad Ads, where they go through one by one bad ads submitted by listeners for sales of horses or horse trailers and things. And the ads are so badly written, it's hilarious. But a more traditional list segment would be like top 10 things for doing thus and such, or gift lists, or a historical list, like 5 most haunted places in California, or something like that. Then there are quiz segments. These were some of my favorite segments to do on my old travel adventure show, Finding Florida. I keep mentioning Finding Florida over and over and over again. I love that show. But for our Florida Man news segment, I would pull a news segment, for example, from an actual reputable news source, like a local news station, and bleep out the criminal's weapon of choice, or the thing that was stolen, or the item that was worn that was weird, or whatever in the story I would play for my co-host Glenn, who hadn't heard it yet. And he would then have to try to guess what the bleeped out word was. Then I'd play a piece of it back. Then I'd play a piece of the news story back without the bleep as the big reveal for both him and the audience. Such fun! Trust me, Florida Man is the gift that keeps on giving. And I mentioned news podcasts before, and we recently launched a new FPN show called Florida Man News. Let's just say it is a very different kind of show from the Newsworthy with Eric and Mandy. And then there are shorter segment pieces that can be added to a show, such as a takeaway segment where you share your thoughts, highlight something from the interview, or give an actionable tip to your listener for them to walk away with. You can also do a how-to or demo segment. So I've seen a lot of shows play with this, and maybe it says something about me, but often those segments that are in the shows I listen to are drink recipes. Whatever, draw your own conclusions. Another idea for your consideration, having a regular guest host or co-host join you for one of your segments. In fact, when I get into monetization and also community building on later episodes, you'll hear some great tricks where the two of those ideas can meet with this idea really, really well. All right, so essentially what happens is, whether it's because they're an expert on a topic or they are just really great at bantering with you, but they don't want to maybe commit to being a full regular co-host or whatever the circumstance, rotating in another person for a segment can be a fun way to freshen up your show. And the last one I'll throw at you, as to not completely overwhelm you with the possibilities, is a rotating episode format, one that flips between a couple of different formats, but that is what the audience has learned to love about the show. For example, I mentioned quizzing my co-host Glenn on episodes of Finding Florida. Well, Those were our preview episodes, which would then be followed by the actual adventure episode in which we traveled to the location. Another example is my friend Andy Kushner's show, The Wedding Biz. Top show in the wedding industry. And the main episodes are him interviewing his guests of the week. He then sends that recording to one of his rotating industry elite special co-hosts. That co-host listens to that interview. It's the raw, pre-edited. They listen to it, right? They then join Andy on the microphone to unpack the conversation that Andy had with the guest on that previous episode. And those episodes he called the next level because they take the guest conversation to the next level. And so it goes regular interview, next level episode, regular interview, next level episode, and on and on and on. And yes, links to both in the show notes. Geez, stop asking. All right. The rest of the build out of the show format is up to you. I've given you a lot of options, but the rest of the build out of the show is really, really up to you. How much thinking outside of the box are you willing and able to do to create additional uniqueness in your show? Also, always gear your content toward your audience and the value that you've promised to deliver them on every episode. And consider the tone of your show based on the content and the audience who's consuming it. And as a final note, I've hit you with a lot of format types here, and I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. Consider all of this and what it has inspired you to do. Consider that your aspirational show format. When starting out the gate, distill your grand idea down to the most important elements and start there. Then, as the needs of your audience, your subject matter, your industry, and you and your brand evolve, so can your show. And you may not even end up where you originally thought you were going to go, right? But that's the fun and joy of this journey in podcasting. So figure out the seat on the roller coaster that feels right for you and your butt and your show. Buckle up and just enjoy the ride. Now, this was part 5 of this initial series of episodes in Podcasting Your Brand, a series I've called Thoughts Before Launching. So if you missed the last few episodes, make sure you go back and listen, preferably in order to maximize the start of your podcast. And this part 5 is the final part of this episode series. We've covered the what, the why, the who, the when, and now the how. So you may be thinking, what about the where, Producer Jemmy? Great question. I'm so glad you asked. All right. Well, I'll be covering the where with you as part of our next series of episodes, in which I'll take you through my recommended launch process. So stay tuned. And as a quick mention, if you are podcasting your brand, whether a personal brand or a business brand, you definitely need to check out that app. I've been telling you about it, and it's a shoo-in. When I say it's a shoo-in, like it's the easiest way that I have ever heard of so far to monetize your expertise and gain new clients. It's the Owl app. So monetize your expertise on Owl. That's spelled with 2 W's and 2 L's. I'm so enthusiastic about this, not only because it's a fantastic app, but also because it was developed by my friend, my personal, actual, in-life, real friend, Jason, who I totally adore. And I know his motivation behind building this app was to give people like you, experts, the ability to say, oh, you want to pick my brain for 15 minutes? Sure, here's Owl. And then you get paid for that instead of just being bombarded with people wanting to pick your brain over and over and over again for free. It is exhausting. So you definitely need to take the other route, right? Take the fork of the road and head the other direction and get on Owl. In fact, you can catch me on there for a one-on-one coaching session. So sign up today with my referral code, P as in producer, L as in my ridiculously long spelled name, Laganier. PL954123 and get your $10 credit. And join me for my next episode, episode 38, where I'll get you going through my recommended launch process. So if you're not subscribed, be sure you do. In the meantime, I have a whole host of free tips for you on my website. Just check out flintstonemedia.com/free tips. Thanks for tuning into Podcasting Your Brand. In this new chapter of the show, I'm revealing how you can harness the power of podcasting to expand your brand. It's something that I've been doing since 2014. So come on, pick up what I've been putting down. Avoid common mistakes and propel your podcasting and branding forward. And if you have questions or are interested in becoming a sponsoring brand of this show, I don't want you to be shy at all, especially not the second one. Reach out to me at Jemmy, spelled Jaime, at flintstonemedia.com. It's producer Jemmy signing off for now. Remember, the only thing more powerful than your voice is your spirit to use it. So turn that mic on.